program, so please use the Q&A function or the chat box to ask your questions. Like Commissioner Caloza mentioned, this training is hosted by the City of Los Angeles Civil and Human Rights and Equity Department, the Department of Public Works, LAPD, and the Philippine American Bar Association, and is co-sponsored by Equality California, the South Asian Bar Association of Southern California, the Southern California Chinese Lawyers Association, and the Asian Pacific American Women's Lawyer Association. Again, this training is open to all, and we will invite everyone to join us and help co-sponsor a future training. Now, first, I'd like to invite LAPD Commander Ruby Flores to the mic. Commander Flores heads up diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives for LAPD and is here to explain the differences between a hate crime and hate incident, as well as some of the steps LAPD is taking to respond to hate. Commander?
Thank you so much for that, Tony. I appreciate the introduction and also the opportunity to be part of this great training, which is certainly much needed, but I think is a great way to start kicking off ways in which we can work together in becoming more inclusive and as a community. And some of the things I'd like to talk about would be just to raise awareness so that we can all be a part of keeping our community safe. So as with hate crimes and hate incidents, there is a difference. We want to hear from both. So we at LAPD, we have a different means to report crimes. So of course, if you are in danger, in immediate danger, you see someone in immediate danger that is in the progress of being victimized physically, that is definitely a 911 situation. So call 911. The best thing to do also is to be a good witness. Get the information about the suspect, descriptors from head to toe, so that our officers can be directed to apprehend the potential suspect. So hate crime is specifically targeted to an individual that's a member of a protected class. So LGBTQ, based on your religion, your ethnicity, disability, those are certainly your protected classes, in which if a crime is target specific, we say, where a person is specifically targeted due to their membership to one of those protected classes, that constitutes a hate crime. In addition to if there are any racial epithets or things that are said to that victim, those are things that we want to know. We want to gather as much information about hate crimes so that we can not only raise awareness, but understand how we can help our community protect themselves. The hate incident would not be a 911 incident. We would ask you to call 1-877-ASK-LAPD. So that's an easy way to remember it, is just by stating Ask LAPD, 1-877-Ask LAPD. Hate incidents would be essentially the same criteria, where a member of a protected class is being targeted specifically for those reasons, but it may not rise to the level of a crime where there's an assault or a robbery or a battery. Or a shooting or some other physical violent act, but it would be come in the form of vandalism, graffiti, hate flyers, hate speech, those things. And some people, I think, tend to not want to report those types of incidents because community members may say, well, I didn't get hurt, it's not a big deal. I get that all the time, or for whatever reason, community members may be reluctant to report that because they don't think it rises to the level of a crime. But to that point, we do want to collect that information again so that we can raise awareness amongst our community members and find ways to protect you. And I think just having a sense of it, and also these hate incidents may lead up to or escalate to a crime, which is what we don't want to happen. So I think the law or our policy is set up in such a way that we are able to hopefully collect this data and look at some indicators that would lead to a physical crime. so that we can essentially prevent some of those crimes. Again, 911 is going to be your emergency call. So this month, and because it is LGBTQ Pride Month, we do see an increase in some of the crimes that are being reported. It could be just traditionally there is a little bit more a larger visible presence of awareness. Perhaps I'm not sure what I can only surmise why we do see an increase, but part of the reason also is part of these forums and training that we're doing, we are increasing awareness. So we are seeing more crimes being reported, which we welcome. And we want to be able to identify patterns so that we can help the community. Part of the prevention and awareness also that we proudly have been working with Commissioner Caloza and our anti-hate groups and the LA Civil Human Rights Commission is ways in which we can empower the community and help raise awareness and prevention. We are doing this through footbeats and just being more visible. Our officers are carrying resource cards that we can provide to the community so that they know what to do in terms of how to report it, but also directing them to resources, which I know is going to be another topic that you will later learn of. But essentially, that's what our goal is, to ensure that we are empowering the community. And also be able to point out ways that we can stay safe in terms of being aware of where you're walking. There might be some environmental issues that you can help prevent being victimized in terms of walking in dark areas, holding on to your belongings, things like that, walking in pairs. Those are all ways that we can help to keep each other safe as well. So with that, if you have any questions, I will be on for the rest of the call, but that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Commander Flores. It's really helpful to sort of know the difference between a hate crime and a hate incident and how to report that, as well as hearing from LAPD in terms of what they're doing to respond to hate. Next up, let's get into the rights and resources for victims of hate, as well as bystanders and allies. Next up, we have Adrian Roxas, a victim rights attorney, former LA County Deputy District Attorney, and President-elect of the Philippine American Bar Association, also known as PABA. Welcome, Adrian.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Tony, for that introduction, and good afternoon to everyone on this training. Here we are a year into the pandemic, over a year into the pandemic, and although we're heading towards some normalcy, during this transition, we are still seeing an increase in hate crimes and hate incidents. And as Commander Flores talked about a few minutes ago, we hopefully have a clear understanding of the difference between a hate crime and a hate incident. But I do want to reiterate, because it does make a difference, as you'll learn during the presentation, that a hate crime is in fact a criminal offense that's punishable and can be prosecuted. And that type of offense is aimed against a person or property and motivated in whole or in part by the victims or the person who's being attacked based on that person's race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. Now in California, a hate crime requires more than just a racially motivated statement. So while a statement such as "go back to where you came from," that statement might be classified as a hate incident, but in the criminal arena, that does not rise to the level of a hate crime unless there is some added threat of violence or actual violence or destruction of property that Commander Flores talked about a few minutes ago. Now, obviously, hate crimes and hate incidents are not new, but over the past year, we've seen the rise and we've seen everything on social media, especially as it relates to Asian American Pacific Islander communities and our LGBTQ community. And we've seen enough of these incidents and crimes on news and on Facebook and on Instagram. And we know that there's usually a couple of commonalities that I've seen in these posts and in these news articles. And the first common factor that I've seen is that usually occurs obviously in a public arena. It's on a sidewalk, it's on a bus, it's on a street corner. And the second common factor is that there's a bunch of people standing around either videotaping it or doing nothing. And when we see these hate crimes on social media, our reactions vary. And they can range from saying, oh my God, that's so horrible, or I would have fought back, or I would have intervened. My wife gets really angry when she sees these incidents on social media, and she cusses at her phone and she says, I would have pepper sprayed that punk, or I would have beat the crap out of that person. And I realize that my wife talks that way because she's generally just like that, but also because she's a lawyer and she has a basic understanding of criminal law and a basic understanding of self-defense laws. But to the average layperson who's standing on the sidelines, watching these hate incidents turn into hate crimes, I'm pretty sure that they're wondering, what can I do? What can I do to protect myself if I'm in that situation? Or what can I do to protect the random person who's being attacked? And I'm sure you thought to yourself when you see these on social media, is a law on my side if I choose to respond, and how can I respond? Now, a few months ago, we saw a video on the news and on social media, and it was an elderly lady, a 76-year-old lady from San Francisco. Her name was Miss Shea, and she was on the corner of Market Street, and we saw her get attacked, and we saw how she fought back. She grabbed a stick and she started attacking that person who was attacking her. And a few weeks after that, we saw another video, actually a couple of videos out of New York that made it viral. One that comes to mind is a Filipino American who was attacked going to church in the morning, and she was attacked because of her race. The person who was attacking her yelled racial epithets at her and stomped on her head, stomped on her body. And we saw, particularly in this incident, 2 male individuals in a lobby just kind of watching as it was happening. And it literally 5 feet away from her being attacked, they closed the door on her. And once in a while, you'll see the videos where bystanders intervene. And you'll see a group of people either separate the victim from the attacker or hold the attacker back. And in these situations, what are their rights? Like, what can you do? And how does the law assess whether you are acting in lawful self-defense or acting in lawful defense of others? Now, as a general rule, under California law, you have the right to defend yourself, and that basic right also extends to defending others. Now, under normal circumstances outside of self-defense, okay, if you were to use deadly force on someone, then you could be charged with a crime. And that is normally brought against you by a city prosecutor or a district attorney. Now, if you acted in self-defense, then you would not be liable for any crime. In California, it's what's known as a complete defense. And self-defense is a legal defense. It's a legal theory that protects an individual from criminal liability. Now, unfortunately, the law is very technical. It's wrangled with a lot of legal jargon, but the general rule when the prosecutors assess cases as to whether or not self-defense would apply is that it is lawful to use force when you reasonably and legitimately believe that you or another person is in imminent danger of physical harm, and that the use of force is necessary to stop the danger. Now, of course, that begs the question of what does lawful mean? What does legitimate mean? What does reasonable mean under self-defense in California? Now, the prosecutors and the courts, they break this particular self-defense law into 3 different requirements. And all of these requirements must be met in order for a person to invoke self-defense or defense of others. The first thing that the prosecutor will look at, the first element that the prosecutor or the court will look at, is whether you reasonably believe that you or someone else was in imminent danger of suffering bodily injury or in imminent danger of being touched unlawfully. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And you reasonably believed that immediate use of force was necessary to defend against that danger. And you used no more force than was reasonably necessary to defend against that danger. Now, the law will look into what is known as imminent danger. And what that means is that the threat of harm or the threat must be imminent, or also known as it must be immediate. It must be happening right now. It can't be a future harm. Okay, so let's take the example of Miss Shea, the 76-year-old elderly Asian in San Francisco on the corner of Market Street. She was punched in the face. It was an unprovoked attack. And if she responded in that situation with a wooden stick and she defended herself against the assailant, now in that situation, she would probably be justified in defending herself because it was clear that the attack was immediate, it was imminent, it was happening at that moment. And unless she protected herself, the danger would continue to happen. So that element of imminence would be satisfied under this situation. Now, we would also want to know whether or not a reasonable person would have acted similarly under the same circumstances. Now, if the answer is yes, then that element would be satisfied. And the law will also look into the degree of force, okay? And this is key, especially for me when I was a prosecutor assessing self-defense laws. I wanted to know whether or not the force that the person who was protecting himself or herself, whether that force was reasonable and proportional, okay? So the key here is that the force must be proportional to the threat of harm that the person is facing, or the threat of harm that someone else is facing. Now, as a general rule, if someone came up to me and said, for example, go back to where you came from, and that person socked me once in the face, I would be justified in protecting myself by punching that person back. I would be defending myself because he or she socked me, and my reaction would be to sock back. Now, if I were to take it a step further in defending myself and pull out a bat or pull out a club and clobber that person unconscious, or even worse, either fracture some bones or kill that person, I would question whether or not my reaction in self-defense was proportional and if it was reasonable under that circumstance. If it is not reasonable and it is not proportional, then you would not be acting in self-defense. Now, if you were to witness an attack, what are your rights as a bystander? Let's take, for example, those two individuals in the lobby who were watching Miss Carey being attacked on the sidewalk. What could they have done, and would the law have protected them? And the answer is yes, the law would have protected those two individuals who shut the door on Miss Carey as she laid on the sidewalk being attacked. The reason being is that they can see that the incident was imminent and it was happening as they were standing there, and they needed to make sure that Miss Carey was protected, and the only way that would have been effectuated is by defending Miss Carey and attacking the person in self-defense. So in that situation, the same analysis would be done in self-defense and in defense of others. Under the circumstances with Miss Carey, the two doormen would have been justified in defending Miss Carey under the theory of defense of others. And the rights would be the same, just as though they were the ones being attacked. Now, in that scenario, like I said, it was clear and it was reasonable for those two doormen to believe that someone was in imminent danger and in fact suffering great bodily injury. If they chose to defend Miss Carey, I would say that they were justified in doing so and justified in defending Miss Carey from that attack. So the takeaway in self-defense under this topic that I'm talking about is three things that I want you to take away. Whether you want to defend yourself or whether you want to defend another person that is being attacked. And the first question is, are you in imminent danger, or is that other person that you are about to defend in imminent danger of suffering bodily injury? The answer is yes. Then you must believe that the immediate force to protect yourself or that person was reasonable under that circumstance. And if the answer to that is also yes, then the final question is, did you use reasonable and proportional force to defend yourself or the other person against that harm? Now, I can't emphasize enough that this is a very basic general overview of self-defense laws, Commander Flores, I'm sure, is aware of all the nuances and the facts that can change, the analysis of a case, and in determining whether or not self-defense is justified. But my general rule, I'll say it again, is that if you use more force than necessary under a circumstance of self-defense, if you use more force than is necessary, then you are not acting in justifiable self-defense. Now, there are also other ways that you can defend or protect yourself that I want you to consider. And this requires no contact at all. It doesn't require you to intervene physically. It doesn't require you to hit anybody. And I would invite you to look at a resource called ihollaback.com. They published this practice called the 5 Ds, and you could look at it more closely for the sake of time. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the 5 Ds basically is to distract, to delegate, to document, to delay, employ a delay tactic, and to direct. And these are all less violent means to protect yourself and to defend another person. Also, to the extent that you're able to, walk away and diffuse a situation. As Commander Flores said, make sure that you are able to provide enough descriptions of the perpetrator before you walk away. And even if you choose to stick around, make sure you're able to document either by video or send yourself a text or a note describing what that perpetrator looks like, because that type of information is required for investigation by law enforcement. Now, I do also want to talk about other traditional non-lethal and completely legal self-defense weapons that are available to Californians. And I want to stress non-lethal because for the purposes of this evening, I'm not talking about gun laws at all, because that requires a whole several days of explanation. But for tonight's presentation, I do want to talk about your rights to carry pepper spray, to carry stun guns, to carry personal alarms or whistles. These are all non-lethal, non-deadly mechanisms that you can use to protect yourself or other people. Now, particularly with pepper spray, there is a limitation. It does have to be below 2.5 ounces. And if you go to Costco or any sporting goods store, they sell what would be a 2.5 ounces pepper spray that's legal to carry. And for stun guns or those electric tasers, there are specific provisions as to these. But as a general rule, if you have no prior convictions and if you're of legal age, then you're allowed to carry that. And obviously personal alarms or whistles, these can be used as a means of deterrence. And knives, I don't want to spend a lot of time on knives, but there are permissible knives that you can carry. And I do want you to look at Penal Code 21510, 21510 of the Penal Code, and that will explain what types of knives that are prohibited. So basically, just to cover, just so I could explain what is prohibited. It's illegal to carry what's known as a switchblade that is 2 or more inches in length. So if it's a switchblade and it's 2 or more inches in length, you are not allowed to carry that. Okay. And again, I'd invite you to look up the law specifically as to this. Okay, I'll move on. Now, your rights as a witness or your rights as a person who's being attacked do not end at self-defense laws. And there are countless resources that you can count on from law enforcement agencies, and this includes LAPD, the prosecutor's offices, and community-based organizations. Now, as Commander Flores talked about earlier, if you witness an attack or if you're attacked, the next logical and hopeful step is for you to contact law enforcement. And prior to contacting law enforcement to report this hate incident or hate crime, it is going to be important for you to remember the details of what the person looked like and the details of what that person said or did during that attack, because that all will be relevant in the analysis of whether or not it was a hate crime or a hate incident. Now, once that report is made, you have the right to request your information to be protected and to be kept from public if you are a victim. And also you have a right to have certain portions of your information redacted from the police report. And many agencies, including LAPD, I know for sure, has victim resources available on site at police stations and substations. And they are there in, these victim services representatives are there in person and can give you resources about surviving as victims and becoming survivors, and how to protect yourselves in terms of getting a protective order and any other type of counseling that's available to you. Additionally, in California, the law requires that each county has a victim resource center. And usually this is located at the district attorney's office. So in LA County, the DA's office is in downtown. And if you're in San Bernardino County, it would be at their headquarters. If you're in any other county in California, there is going to be a victim resource center where victim advocates are housed, and they provide victims and witnesses with counseling and preparing for court and applying for restitution or lost compensation and getting protective orders if needed. And I know specifically in the DA's office in LA, they have a Bureau of Victim Services, and one of our contacts there is very helpful to the community is Monica Sebastian, and she is readily available to give any type of resources that victims and witnesses would be eligible for. Now, you also have the right to have an attorney with you, and these are known as victims' rights attorneys or Marcy's law attorneys. And these are attorneys who are specifically have your rights as a victim or witness. That is their only concern. They're not representing the defendant or the suspect. They're not representing the people of California. They are representing the person who was harmed. And a lot of firms and a lot of resources out there take these cases on a pro bono basis. And what they can do for you is become a liaison for you so that you don't have to deal with law enforcement, because I know for sure law enforcement does a lot of contacting with civilians, and that can get burdensome. So if you have a victim's rights attorney, they can go with you to court, they can go with you to make that report or any subsequent follow-up reports to law enforcement, and they can help you make what's known as victim impact statements or seek compensation for any loss of wages and any loss of property value that you suffered as a survivor. Now, in California, there's also the Victim Compensation Board, and this is a particular fund that is available to victims, and it helps reimburse victims of violent crimes for certain crime-related offenses, such as medical offenses, like I said, relocation, if you're in fear of living at your home or staying at your home because the attacker has targeted you and knows where you live. Relocation funds are available, and also loss of income is also available, and this is all funded by the California Victim Compensation Board. Now, I have a couple more minutes. Let me just wrap up by saying that, many of our audience tonight is from the LA area, and I do want you to visit the city attorney's and the district attorney's office's websites for LA County, and there you'll find a wealth of resources available for you, particularly for the city of LA. I know that they have an app that you can download on your phone. And their resources are available in 14 different languages. I wanted to stress that because a lot of times our victims and witnesses, they are reluctant in reporting crimes because of a language barrier. But LA City has taken that step to provide 14 different languages to any person who's a victim or a witness to a crime. And LA County DA's office, they have, like I said earlier, the Bureau of Victim Services, who dozens of victims representatives who are ready and willing to answer any questions. So the resources are out there. There are also community resources that we partner up with a lot, who can provide pro bono services if you're a victim. Particularly my firm, Roxas Law, we represent several victims of hate crimes, and we don't charge a single penny, and we don't ask for anything up front or anything down the road. So a lot of firms are out there that are willing to help you out on a pro bono basis, and that is strictly pro bono without having to pay for that attorney's representation. And I do want to end on this note. Look, the reality is if you're a victim of a crime or a hate incident, it can be very embarrassing, right? You're going to feel alone. You're going to feel alienated. You're going to question yourself. Do I really belong here? This person just told me to go back home, and you'll feel isolated. Go back to where you came from. These are things that cause you to question your right to be here. But if anything after tonight, after the presentation from Commander Flores and Abigail, I hope that you feel a sense of empowerment, because there are rights out there, and you are protected by the law as a victim and as a witness. So I hope this is something that you can consider and do the right thing if you witness a hate crime or a hate incident.
Thank you, Adrian. That was really helpful in terms of providing just the knowledge in terms of rights and resources, both for victims of hates as well as bystanders that want to intervene. Commander, did you want to say something?
I did. Thank you so much for that. So the only thing I really neglected to tell you all, which is I think is very, very critical, is that we offer this reporting mechanism and victim resources in every language. So please do not shy away from or be reluctant to report for fear that we have no one that's going to be able to respond, to communicate with you, or to offer resources. We have a language bank for translation services at the onset for 911. But also we do have a victims crisis response team out of the mayor's office that will respond for critical incidents such as this for our victims, family members. I mean, because being the victim of a hate crime can certainly be traumatic. And I couldn't even imagine, what a victim and their family members would be going through. So to know that we have that, it's an added comfort. I hope that would be and something that's not going to be a barrier for someone not to report a crime for fear of that they will feel that no one understands them or no one will empathize with them. Or be able to tell them what those next steps are starting from the onset of that crime during that night. So those are certainly resources that will respond 24/7 to the scene, to the location. The other thing too that I didn't say was that there are ways in which we can maintain a level of confidentiality. Because being the victim of a hate crime, when you're being targeted specifically for things that you believe in and your values or your sexual orientation, those are things that are private and that are really difficult to talk about. So we do have in our reporting procedures, we will extract your name from the report. We would give you a confidentiality sheet so that our detectives will be able to communicate with you, but when forms and reports are made public, your name will be extracted from it and it is held confidential. So I hope that that's another reason to understand that there are ways that we are really working hard to protect you and to raise awareness and increase the number of reports. I think most agencies would probably not want to take hate crime reports or hate incidents for fear of that it raises a red flag, or it raises then, oh gosh, is there an issue in LA? Or it's not a statistic that we're proud of, but I think at the same time, it does demonstrate that we are taking reports from our victims and witnesses, and that we are taking this highly seriously so that we can prevent the crime at the end of the day and really provide those resources to our victims and those that are involved.
Thank you, Commander. Finally, we have Commissioner Abigail Zelenski. She is an attorney, president of the Philippine American Bar Association, and a commissioner on the city's Commission of Civil Rights to cover employment rights and discrimination. Commissioner Zelenski.
Thank you, Commissioner Hoang, and thank you, Adrian and Commander Flores. I'm going to switch gears a little bit about my discussion. It's going to be if you've experienced hate incidents in the form of discrimination and harassment at the workplace. But before I do want to speak a little bit about my commission, LA Civil Rights. The Civil Human Rights Commission was established in 2019 as a result of advocacy groups like the Black Worker Center. The LA Civil Rights Department was formed relatively recently at the end of 2020. And the purpose of the LA Civil Rights Department is combating inequities and discrimination. And I saw a question on the chat as to whether or not you can report hate speech on private property. I think that might be within the purview of LA Civil Rights when the Enforcement Division is up and running, which is going to be very soon, as long as it's within the city of LA and it's private, not a government property or government player. So currently the LA Civil Rights Department is not yet able to take cases, but when it does, it will be able to take complaints on discrimination in housing, commerce, education, and employment by private actors within the city of Los Angeles. My discussion today, again, is going to address workplace discrimination. California law and federal law prohibit workplace discrimination and harassment on a wide range of protected categories. Because California law is typically more protective than federal law, I'm going to focus on California law. In California, it's illegal to discriminate or harass an employee based on actual, perceived, or association with a long list of categories. And I'll mention them just one time right now, and then I'll just refer to them as protected categories. So you can't be discriminated or harassed based on race, color, ancestry, national origin, language, citizenship, religion, religious creed, which includes religious dress and grooming practices, sex, including pregnancy, childbirth, breastfeeding, related medical conditions, gender, gender identity, gender expression, your age if you're over 40, your sexual orientation, veteran or military status, physical disability, mental disability, medical condition, including genetic characteristics, genetic information, and marital status. So discrimination is when you're treated differently or unfavorably based on one of these protected classes. Discrimination is a little bit different from harassment. Discrimination is a concrete adverse employment action motivated by your protected status or perceived status or association with that status. And so some examples would include of an adverse employment action that would be termination, demotion, getting suspended, being part of a performance improvement plan for infractions when your other coworkers who are not in a protected class are not being put on one and being reprimanded, a poor performance review, not getting selected for a job, not being promoted, getting an undesirable assignment, or getting an undesirable work location assigned to you. If this has happened to you and it was motivated by your protected status, then that may be a violation of law and you should definitely report it. And I'll discuss that after I talk about what unlawful harassment means. It's a disrespectful or unprofessional conduct in the workplace. And this can be verbal harassment, slurs, jokes, insults, gestures, teasing. It can be visual, posting or distributing offensive emails, posters, symbols, drawings, computer displays, and it can be physical conduct, threatening another person, blocking somebody's way, making some sort of physical contact in an unwelcome manner. Your boss, manager, supervisor, owner of the company, coworkers are not allowed to discriminate or harass against you. And your employer can also be liable for discrimination and harassment if you're being treated this way by third parties. So by customers, clients, vendors, other people If your employer knows or should know that you're being harassed, then they need to prevent it from happening. So there are two agencies on the state and federal level that address harassment and discrimination in the workplace and that you can report to. So the first is the Department of Fair Employment Housing in California, DFEH, and in the federal level, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC. I've put a link into the chat box to LA Civil Rights, where you can get direct links to the DFEH and to the EEOC to make these complaints. So the two agencies, they have overlapping jurisdiction, meaning they can often take on the same complaint, but not always. If you're uncertain, like I said, generally speaking, California law is more protective than federal law. So I think it would be a good idea to try the DFEH first. But again, either one, and the two agencies do speak to one another. In these types of situations, if you want to make a report to the DFEH or to the EEOC, you don't need to hire a private attorney. You definitely can to help you with the process, but you don't need to. It's very important, no matter what stage you're at, if you do happen to experience discrimination or harassment in the workplace, to make a record of it. Even if you don't want to file a formal claim with the state agency or file a lawsuit, report it to your manager or supervisor. And if the company is big enough, report it to your human resources department as well. If you do decide to file a claim, which I would strongly urge that you do, to enforce your rights and to penalize employers from doing this and making workplaces much better, the DFEH and the EEOC, it's their job to enforce these civil rights and to protect people from unlawful discrimination. They will investigate on your behalf, and depending on their findings, they may file a complaint on your behalf and prosecute. They can also try to mediate for you, meaning that they'll see if there's a resolution that they can help you with that does not involve prosecution or filing a lawsuit. If for any reason the DFEH or the EEOC decide they don't want to prosecute, you still have the right to sue. They'll issue you what's called a right to sue letter, and you can file a civil lawsuit on your own or with the help of a private attorney. You should always be mindful of timeframes. They can be short under federal law for discrimination, harassment, and a little bit longer under California law. So the bottom line is, if you've been subject to harassment and discrimination in the workplace, you have rights and you should report. You don't need to tolerate it. So with that, I will return it back to Commissioner Hoang.
Thank you, Commissioner Zelenski. So I think we'll open up to Q&A now. I know some folks have already dropped in things in the chat, but if you haven't yet, please use the chat box or the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask a question. I believe our first question is from Alexandra Del Rio, who asked, if I'm in a public place, say a bus, and witnessing a hate incident where no one is in physical danger but is being verbally harassed, what is the recommended bystander intervention, if any?
I'll talk about this one. What I would recommend is, actually, I'll pull it up right now. It's ihollaback.org.com, I think, or .org. In that situation where there isn't actually any physical violence at that point, I would recommend against becoming violent or becoming physical in defending that other person. Now, if there is a threat, let's say the attacker is saying, I'm about to kick your butt, I'm about to sock you in your face, and that threat becomes imminent at that point, then you would be justified in protecting that other person. But in stressing the non-lethal and non-contact self-defense, ihollaback.org is actually the website. They talk about the 5 Ds. and they have a bystander guide. Let me see if I could link it onto here right now. But in that situation, they would recommend that you distract. So create some type of distraction in that situation. So the focus is no longer on that victim or on that person who's being attacked. They would also, recommend delegating, like delegate, have someone else call the police so you can stand there and you can make sure that the person who's being attacked is safe. In that situation, based on those facts alone, where you're telling me that there's no physical contact or no imminent threat, I would strongly advise against becoming physical with the person who's doing these verbal statements. And Commander Flores, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, that is excellent advice. And I think the measure or the balance would be the level to which things are escalating. We certainly don't want to advise you to intervene and that actually cause an incident to escalate. And now you're having to protect yourself and someone else. But if you're able to intervene verbally, or at least, call that person out and say, hey, why did you say that? Or, you have to be the judge in your own mind to decide if you're going to verbally intervene to protect someone else. I would love to see that we do stand up for each other. And I think that is probably the number one way to combat hate, is when we do stand up and intervene and call people out when things are wrong and when things are people are mistreated. But certainly you have to do that with a sense of balance so that you're not escalating or creating more of a safety issue, which is, a lot of times we say even maybe just your mere presence there and maybe not saying anything, but calling 911 or calling to ask for police to respond. That in itself is a way to intervene. And that is a way sometimes too that would deter a suspect to continue to escalate a situation if they see witnesses and they see people. And sometimes we act, in numbers, where if you're just standing there and you're calling someone out for their behavior, someone else may hear you and back you up and say, hey, you know what, you're right. That's not the way to call this, to refer to this person. I would hope that would be the way it goes, but at the same time, being an excellent witness is certainly the way to go for sure.
Thank you, Commander. Up next, I think we'll take a live question from Lane Caspi.
Thank you so much. First, let me say you guys are all amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. It's incredible. I came on for a very specific reason that wasn't addressed, which is of no fault of anybody's here. I'm on the board of a nonprofit called PALS, we're LAPD Devonshire PALS. And I came on in hopes of giving our staff, our volunteers, and our board training for youth protection, how to report when there's an incident with youth, not necessarily violent, but just what's the protocol. So Commander, you may be the best to answer this. What training do we put our staff and our volunteers through? Because right now we're a little bit open. We haven't done much training. We have background checks and fingerprints and all that, but that's irrelevant when something comes up.
You're right. That is an excellent point. And we do right now, what we're talking about within the department is creating an active bystandership and leadership role from everybody's position within the organization in terms of workplace issues, but also in the field. And I know that in my conversations with some of the schools, the school officials, that bullying and things like this are of concern. So we do want to empower our youth and teachers to to intervene verbally and to address it, call people out when you do see some of those behaviors before they escalate. So it is something that we're working on. I don't think can't say that we have a solid curriculum yet, but that is something that we're aware of, and we want to make sure we get ahead of it.
Thank you very much. It's more of a training. I feel like that's necessary. There's a lot of youth organizations out there with no training on how to report an issue that comes up. And that's a real problem for all of us. So if you come up with anything, I'd love to get the next memo on that.
Excellent, I will. Which division are you at?
LEP to Devonshire.
Devonshire, okay. All right. I'm going to put my email address in the chat for other questions that, such as your question, so I can circle back with you as well.
Any other questions? Again, if you have any other questions, please drop them in the chat or use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If not, then I think we'll wrap it up as I know we're getting close to the end of time. Again, thank you all so much. Thank you to our speakers, the City of Los Angeles, and all of the co-sponsors for making this training series possible. The next Know Your Rights and Bystander Intervention training will be on August 31st at 5:30. There will be trainings on the last Tuesday of every month through October. And again, you could sign up at bit.ly/noplaceforhate.com. For more information on stopping hate or to find resources mentioned today, visit civilandhumanrights.lacity/LA for all. Again, my name is Tony Hoang. I'm the next Executive Director for Equality California and today's moderator. Thank you all for joining us and have a great evening.